I have a surprising amount of stuff that I've been neglecting to go over. I'm going to put it all in one video. There is a table of contents in the description below. Please look at that. Please also look at my description, because this description was a pain to make because of all the various things that I'm going to be showing in here. But let's start with something that I think is going to be kind of the next movement in motors and change in motors. Lately, motors have been getting a lot cheaper. There's been like an eco line of motors for pretty much every motor line, and honestly, the eco line motors are totally fine. The differences are that they're not using, all of them across the board are typically like this. They are not using titanium shafts, they're using hardened steel shafts, which weighs a little bit more and is a little bit less durable, but I mean, I've never broken a hardened steel shaft, hardened steel, not regular steel shaft, solid or hollow. I've never broken a hardened steel shaft, so I don't see that as a problem. They're not using the strongest aluminum, they're using 6065, which is actually much easier to manufacture, which is making it a lot cheaper. They're using cheaper bearings, they're using slightly cheaper windings, slightly cheaper magnets, but overall the end result of the motor is that it still performs really well. So there are all these eco-line motors, and they're really hard to tell apart from the high-end motors. Now, if you're very experienced, you can tell a difference, but it's not really that significant. So in my opinion, I would go with the eco-line motors nowadays, because I really don't see a point in getting the higher price variants, but hey, it's up to you. You can go with whatever you wish. So the next kind of wave of improvement in motors that I've seen is, in my opinion, maybe going to be the bearing, or at least this is like an interesting thing to talk about. The bearing, so originally we had 22 and 23 size motors that were using 8mm outer diameter bearings, and then we all kind of collectively noticed that, oh hey, there's a motor that has a 9mm bearing and it somehow feels nicer and smoother and better than the 8mm bearing. Let's just all move to 9mm bearings. So that's essentially what happened. This is a 2208 from Hawksky from yesteryears. This is my motor, and it's using a 9mm bearing. This is also the Racer Star 2507, or no, 2508, yeah, 2508, that is also using a 9mm bearing with the same 4mm shaft, and this is the Eachine 2507 from the Tyro 129 that I'm going to get to in a second. That's also using a 9mm bearing, and I think a 3mm shaft actually, which is interesting. Yeah, it looks like a 3mm shaft. Oh, I just noticed that. No, it's 4mm. I'll measure that. Okay, so 9mm is great, but when I picked up the Avenger 2806, I noticed that there was something very special about this motor. It has a 19x19 platform, and then I noticed, oh, they kind of had to do that because they're using a 12mm size bearing. This is huge. This is probably the most significant thing about this motor, of the whole construction of the motor. This 12mm bearing, I think, is what's giving this motor the incredible smoothness factor. When I fly the 7-inch quad, it feels just a different level of smoothness. It's just like, it's like a smoothness I've never felt. And this term, this concept of smoothness, it's a really elusive term, and it's something that a lot of people have talked about with motors and all sorts of things. A lot of people are saying that the weaker magnets are smoother, or the wider air gaps are smoother, or I'm using strong magnets with a wide air gap with square magnets and it's giving me the smoothness, but the strong motor and the efficiency, all this hoopla, which honestly just sounds like BS to me, because I've tried all those motors across the board and they all feel the same. The power differences are the main difference between them, and maybe the efficiency a little bit. Having strong magnets, curved magnets, very close to the stator, very small air gap is what gives you a nice efficient motor. And I've tried all variants, and I prefer the ones that have strong magnets that are curved and close to the stator, and that have that kind of notchy feel when you turn the motor. Now, the notchy feel is not the best thing to have in a motor. However, it doesn't feel different to me in the air than any other motor, even motors that are weaker magnets. The difference between the weaker magnets and the overall lower construction spec motors, in my opinion, lower construction spec, however, there are some high-end motors that now use weak magnets and wide air gaps and square magnets, is that they're much easier to tune, because you don't got to deal with a whole bunch more electronic weirdness in the system, as well as like the feedback noise, as well as the tuning issues, which can potentially cause more problems because the motor does have a whole lot more power. Anyways, when I tried this motor with this 12mm bearing, I was really impressed, because there is just something about the quad that feels just drastically smoother going from the 2508 to the 2806, and I don't think it's the size of the motor. I believe it's the bearing. probably what is giving this motor that smoothness factor that's so incredible. So I went to the motor manufacturers and I talked to a bunch of them about trying to squeeze an 11 or a 12 millimeter bearing into a 22 or 23, maybe a 23.5 or 24 size motor for 5-inch use, because I think it's going to make such a significant difference that I think it'll change the way we actually fly the quads when we're doing cinematography type stuff. It'll also add a whole bunch of durability to the motor because now you have a massive bearing in there. And here's what they say. They said, well, kind of all of them said the same thing. They said, the stators that we use come from a mold, and so if we wanted to make a 23 size motor with the larger bearing, we could. However, we'd have to make a new mold. The stator poles would need to be shorter. However, the very end of the stator pole is more important than the core of the stator pole, so it's okay to lose kind of that iron core or the ferrite core of the stator and move it kind of more out towards the ends. It can be re-engineered so that the windings work out and everything works out, but they would have to spend the money to make a new stator mold, which is about $8,000 to $10,000 USD is the range that I heard. So then I talked to all of them, like, can we please do this? And this is something that I would personally love to do. However, I personally have hit the issue where if you do anything that's of any value, the company out there is just going to rip you off overnight and copy you. Now, in this particular area, it's going to take a little bit more doing and some more money to actually rip off this improvement. However, it's not impossible. And so there's no company that's really willing to jump on this so far and really change things up, because some other company's going to rip them off. And that's the same thing with the folding props that I've heard from companies. And this is the same thing I've heard from a number of companies with anything, any idea I bring them, which is really unfortunate. So this copying problem is seriously stagnating our development in this particular field, and probably in many other fields in everywhere as well. Something I had to point out up front because that is a really significant issue. So now, moving on, let's look at the Tyro 129. The Tyro 129, the main feature of this quad is that it is $129. I don't know about you, but I don't really care to spend money on a product where the main feature is the price. And the name of the quad is literally Tyro 129 because it's $129. But okay, this is a 7-inch quad for $129 with a GPS included. I don't know how on earth they are selling this thing for that price, but let's take a look at all the components. So the frame is actually totally fine. There's nothing wrong with the frame. It's using 5mm arms. I think the frame is going to perform great. It's actually totally suitable design. I'm just missing one of my little sidebars where the camera gets mounted, so I can't really build it on this frame. I'm going to build it on one of my own frames, however, when my new prototypes come in. The frame feels sturdy. The carbon is of the cheapest carbon I've kind of ever seen. It's cheapest of the cheapest carbons out there. The electronics look a little bit sketchy. I've actually never seen a ESC board as empty as the ESC board on this. I don't even know what this is. I think it's a 4, or I wouldn't even bother trying to run more than 4S on this ESC because it just looks so sketchy. I mean, I've never seen an ESC board with that much free space on it anywhere else. Moving on, the flight controller is probably totally fine. It's stock flight controllers. They all pretty much work. The VTX is nothing that I would really trust with anything. I would definitely not put my GoPro on this quad. The FPV camera is, of course, a Cadex camera because Cadex has secured their name as the budget camera supplier, which is really unfortunate for them because that's not really what you want to be. But hey, they're probably selling a bunch of cameras. I don't like Cadex because they're great people and I really appreciate them, and some of their products are decent. The Tarsier is fine, however, it has a really awful user experience, but it does perform fine. I just don't like them because their cameras are glitchy and their various things don't work properly. The motors are probably the most interesting thing about this entire setup. It's a 2507 motor. It's 1800 kV, so that makes it a 4S 7-inch motor. It's of incredibly low build quality. It's the lowest build quality I've ever seen, which is odd because Eachine kind of goes all over the place. They have some motors that are actually decent and some that are awful. You see that there's a C-clip underneath. I'm going to put on the screen if this is a 3 or 4 millimeter shaft. That's a I believe it's a 9mm bearing. If it's not, I'm going to put that on the screen as well. This is a 16x16 motor mount, which is nice that they did that, but you can see that the motor has very weak magnets, I can feel, or I can assume from based on what it feels like. Square magnets, wide air gap, really crummy looking windings. The wire coming off the motor is just an extension of the windings. There isn't actually wire. You can't actually cut and solder this stuff easily, so I would not recommend cutting this if you do pick this up. The metal is likely of the softest type. The prop shaft is made from the aluminum of the bell, which will likely break off if you do hit it, but if you crash this thing, it's gonna break anyways. So let's move on and segue to actually the props that the Tyro 129 comes with. So this is the Dahl 70 56, the 7056 Cyclone, 7056C Cyclone prop from Dahl prop. And I haven't tried this prop yet. I put it on my 7-inch with the Brother Hobby 2806 motors, and it performs about the same as the HQ prop, as the HQ 7x4x3. I don't really feel any difference. The Dahl prop does weigh a full 2 grams less than the HQ prop. I think the HQ prop may actually be a little bit more efficient because the pitch, or when I look at the blade pitches, it just looks less aggressive. So moving up to this high, bigger size prop, seems like the aggressiveness of the blade or just the drag profile of the prop may matter more than the actual weight of the prop when you have a motor that's suitable to actually spin the prop and manage it appropriately. So moving on to antennas, I have a lot of new antennas here. Most of them are from Lumineer, and there you go. This one is from Speedy Bee, which I think is a Runcam company. I'm not totally sure, but they were so nice to put my name on the antenna, which is awesome. These are all 5.8 gigahertz antennas. They are all somehow polarized in some fashion or way. This is the TBS Triumph V2. It's lovely. It's got an MMCX connector on it. I am probably the worst tester for antennas imaginable because I don't fly with other people, and everything sort of works. A linear antenna, like on these little toothpick builds, these linear antennas even work totally fine. The circularly polarization does help a little bit with the scatter and like feedback stuff, but now that I have rapid fire, it works so great anyways that it doesn't even matter. So as long as the antenna is kind of putting out the power in a even orb, it's going to work great for me. So all of these antennas work great. And there's one other antenna coming from another company very soon that I can't show off, which is actually really impressive because of its size, and it performs the same as all the other antennas. I mean, in my testing, I found it to perform a teensy tiny bit better than the other antennas, but it could very well just be the antenna placement on the quad. Putting the antenna out in the open, away from the battery and other things, is going to make more of an impact than probably the actual antenna that you're using. I'm going to throw in the Foxtail Lollipop in there as well, and I'm going to talk about one other thing about these antennas. So a while ago, I was speaking to an engineer about antennas and radio waves and things. First of all, I actually really like the Lumineer antennas because they feel really good quality, and some of them come with these little flexible wire, which works really well. This long one, which doesn't even fit in frame, is my default on my goggles now because it's so long it keeps the antenna away from my head. Like I said, antenna placement is more important than, at this point in time at least, antenna placement is more important than which antenna you're using. Of course, directional antennas are going to be better in some senses, but whatever. Speaking to the engineer about the antenna attachments, and they were saying that the SMA connector is actually a very suitable connector for these antennas. However, the load that the SMA feels may not be suitable for this application. The MMCX is a better connector, but another thing that they pointed out is that these right angle joints in the antenna wire are a significant portion of signal loss. And that's interesting because some very high-end antennas come with these right angle joints on them. And we also have a right angle joint on MMCX if desired. And while these do give us an added amount of convenience in mounting it to goggles and whatnot, I can't, again, tell any difference. But if anybody knows if these right angle joints really do impact the signal performance, I won't even use them anymore. I'll just use a very long antenna and just bend it up and leave it at that. Okay, let's move on to micro stuff. So first, actually, before I go to micro stuff, I'll go over this. This is a new camera from Eachine. And the reason I was attracted to this camera is because, first of all, it's the same color as the Runcam Eagle and the Ratel from Cadex. And I believe Cadex copied the paint from the Eagle because all these companies know that the Micro Eagle is a fantastic camera. It's a very special camera because of its fantastic lens and fantastically large sensor. Its performance is, in my opinion, unmatched by any other FPV camera, analog FPV camera in existence. Still to this day, Foxeer tells me that they still have a 1/2-inch sensor camera on the way. They told me the same thing about 10 months ago, and nothing has changed, so maybe it'll come someday soon. But anyways, the reason I was interested in this camera is because it has that same red paint on it, and the lens apparatus is not typical. It's kind of like a weird long lens apparatus, which implies to me that there might be something special going on with the sensor. Well, I got the camera, there's nothing special going on with the sensor. It's a regular 1/3-inch CMOS sensor, just like any other FPV camera. It's nice that it has this plastic backing, because if anybody has broken a Micro Eagle on their frame, they will know that when you mount it at an angle like this and you kind of knock the camera, it'll slam down into the frame and it'll pop a cap off the bottom here, then your camera's dead. So it's really nice that it has this plastic back on here for that to be protected. However, that also makes the camera a little bit deeper and wider, so it's got to fit in your frame better. The lens on this is a little bit longer as well, even measured from the screw hole forward, so it's something to keep in mind. However, this is a $23 camera, and so when I got it and I tested it, the lens is a little bit weird and wonky, but the field of view is totally fine, and the distortion is totally suitable as well. It actually performs totally fine in the field of view sense. It has a slightly wider field of view than the Micro Eagle, but as you're seeing, the performance of this camera is, in my opinion, better in some ways than most of the other 1/3-inch sensor CMOS cameras, the small sensor CMOS cameras. I find this camera to be significantly sharper than the rest of the 1/3-inch sensor cameras, which is really interesting. Other things are that it doesn't have great HDR like the Predator or anything. It's totally fine. It looks great. It actually looks a lot like a CCD camera to me, but higher resolution. But it is a CMOS camera. I know for sure it's a CMOS camera. It just looks surprisingly nice for this random Eachine camera. It's also not a camera that I can recognize that came from anywhere. As in, I can't tell if it came from Runcam, Foxeer, Cadex, or some other crappy company about, where they got the sensor from. I can't tell these things. It looks like they kind of put together this hodgepodge of parts from a number of different companies and came up with a new camera. So it's really curious that they just randomly came out with this camera. But if you're looking for a somewhat budget camera, this is suitable. It does weigh 10.7 grams, so keep that in mind. It is a little bit more hefty than even the Micro Eagle, which is like 8.9 grams. So it's about a gram and a half heavier than the next heaviest micro size FPV camera. Now, on the same front as cameras, let's move on to the micro cameras. I actually prefer the Whoop camera, this little tiny Whoop camera, over the Nano cameras that are available right now. I haven't tried the Nano Predator yet. I do have some on the way, but what you're seeing now is the Nano 2, the Runcam Nano 2, which in my opinion, it's the $20 Nano camera from Runcam, not the $35 one. In my opinion, that camera looks better than the $35 version, because I think the $35 one has really crazy HDR, and the colors are out of proportion, and it kind of loses detail in the picture because of the extreme HDR and colors. I actually like the $20 one a lot better, but I still prefer the micro little tiny Nano, like femto, I guess you could call it, Whoop camera over the Nano cameras, aside from the Micro Predator, the Nano Predator, which I haven't tried yet. So moving on with micros, take a look at these props. This is the HQ3020 prop, which is really great. They did have a 3x3 prop, which I tried, and I found it to be a little bit high load for an 1103 motor. Not a little bit, way high of a load for 1103 motor. I think the 3030 prop, the minimum size motor you can run that thing on is a 1304. You probably even need a 14 size motor, 1404, because it is a kind of a meaty prop. It has a high load. So I told Zong about what I thought about that prop, and literally 2 days later, this prop showed up at my doorstep. He had already sent it to me because I asked for the 3x3 prop. Now this prop, I didn't bring a 3x3 prop out here to show you, but this prop, it has a little bit narrower cord, it's got a little bit lower pitch, and it is a gram, half a gram lighter, 0.6 grams lighter. The 3x3 is 1.5 grams, this is 0.9 grams. So kudos to HQ, because this is a much better prop than the 3x3 prop. However, I still think that this prop is a little bit high load for an 1103 motor. I do think that it requires just a one step up. A 12 size would probably be fine. 13 size would probably be excellent on this prop. The prop is really durable feeling. It's made for a 1.5 millimeter shaft press fit. And yeah, more to come on that. HQ also has come out with their final version of the 65 millimeter prop, which is actually on this quad. This is the 65 millimeter prop. And this prop is finally interesting because it actually performs pretty decently. Not decently, it performs very well. So let's compare it to, this is the latest GemFan prop. So the GemFan has been tweaking this prop for a while now, and they've come out with several versions. I developed a version with them, and then they just went nuts with this prop design after that. So this prop is a little bit wider cord, and it's still made of the same material, which in my opinion is a little bit flimsy. So HQ started from a different direction. They started with a much more aggressive prop, which I told them was way too aggressive when I first tried it. And so he went through several variations, and I urged him not to send out those first initial batches to anybody, but he didn't listen. He sent it out to a bunch of people, and then a bunch of people tried the prop and were like appalled at how awful the prop was. It's terrible balance, terrible performance, way over prop for any 11.0 anything motor. And so they kind of lost confidence in this prop. But I'm happy to say that he kept at it, he kept making new and new versions, which is a very expensive process for HQ because they do make final props and then test them and then move on with the prop. And this prop is a lot more rigid than the GemFan props and also the King Kong 65 millimeter props. The prop weighs a teeny tiny bit more, but I can't feel the difference in the weight. The prop load is much lower than the original prop. It's got great balance. Because of the stiffness of the prop, it's probably gonna hold up to higher RPMs better. Not probably, I know it does. I've already tested on a bunch of my quads. And it's likely that this prop will fit a wider variety of these micro quads, these toothpick style quads, because it's stiffer. So you're gonna have less vibrations and less things running down the prop. The prop performs great. It doesn't perform notably different than the King Kong or the GemFan, or all these props perform very similarly. I have my own opinions of them, but really from toothpick to toothpick build, they don't like all the props. If you're going to look for a prop for your build, you really just need to buy a couple of them and just see which one fits your build, because these builds are very finicky. I haven't fully figured out why they're so finicky, but the same set of props that works beautifully on one quad will be unflyable on another quad. So you really do have to pick up a couple of these. And I would recommend starting with the newest GemFan and this HQ prop. I bet that one of those two props are going to be the best option for your toothpick build. Moving on, I also have been testing a number of these DJI Tello props. I really don't know what this Tello company is, or this DJI Tello. I don't know. I don't understand how the system, how their collaboration works. But as far as I know, the Tello brand is using DJI stuff in some ways, and they have a bunch of products, but I don't care about any of those. This is their prop, and this is a 3-inch prop. It's a 76 millimeter prop, and I've tried a couple of variations of this prop, and I have 2 variations here to show you. This is the version from my RC Mart, and this is the one version from Banggood. Now the Banggood version is using more of a glass nylon material, and it actually does perform a little bit better because it weighs even less than the one from my RC Mart. But the one from my RC Mart is a lot more durable, significantly more durable. So I would recommend that one, just because if you do hit something, this prop really just shatters and it doesn't work out. This 76 millimeter prop is a 3-inch prop. However, the load on the motor is very comparable to the 65 millimeter prop, which is what makes this prop so darn special, because it's an extremely low load prop. In fact, you can run the same exact KV that you would run on the 65 millimeter props on this larger 76mm prop. The differences you're going to feel on an 1103 size motor is that this prop is going to have slightly less response. However, you're going to have much more grip in the way of kind of like wing-like grip. If you're kind of falling from a dive, you don't have to give it as much throttle, and it kind of just wings its way out because it has so much more prop area. Kind of hard to describe that wing kind of thing, but when you fly it, you feel it. It really has a lot more grip for a similar all-up weight, 72 to 75 grams all-up weight. I think this is a really suitable prop to try it. Unfortunately, it doesn't come in 1.5mm shaft size, and drilling out these prop materials that this particular version of prop comes in, or this design comes in, is 1,000 times worse than the King Kong props. The King Kong props are actually made of pretty good plastic. These are made of garbage plastic that just will not drill out correctly no matter what you do. And then they don't even sit straight on the motor, they sit tilted. It's really an awful experience. So if you're going to try this prop, just keep in mind that the experience is going to be awful. Moving on, this is my has been my charger for my micros for a while now. This is my travel charger, and it's just the reason I use this one. Oh, you can't see it at all in the a little bit. The reason I use this one is for two reasons. This charger, like travel charger thing, is because first of all, it does 10 amps and it does 6S, so I can charge all my batteries on it if I really need to. It's really nice and small, really compact. It works really well. The buttons work, and like there's a lot of chargers that have these like rolly wheels, and the rolly wheels are really awful to me because you'll move the wheel one click and it'll like jump around 2 or 3 clicks, or it won't jump around any click, and then the next click in the scroll wheel will jump around 3 or 4 clicks. It's just totally, it's hard to navigate with this stupid, unpredictable wheel. So I really like the touch interface. It's a really small thing, but I really like this touch interface. It's really nice. However, the menus are annoying because if you want to change your LiPo settings, you have to make a new LiPo in this LiPo menu, which is just odd. Whatever it is, it works fine. I leave it on one setting and I just charge all my LiPos. They all parallel charge, which is all I can do nowadays because I don't have like independent charge channels, but it'll do up to 3S, which is where I'm headed to for my 3-inch quads. Now, something you may have noticed is that I have this Toothpick quad from Diatone, and I'm going to say a word about this because a lot of people have told me, why are so many other people talking about your collaboration with Diatone except for you? I'm not talking about it because this isn't done yet. They're still working on a couple things, and they just told me a week ago that they're going to change the camera for shipping for the final version. And so I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to wait till I get the final version. I'm going to make a video on the 3-inch 3S version, maybe the 2S version, but really the 3-inch 3S version, which I'll say right now, it's more of a pro level, if there's anything like pro, but a higher skill level quad, because when you move up to 3 inches, it can generate a lot more speed and it could definitely break things much, much easier. The frame design is actually not my frame design. It's their frame design, but I did help them tweak it a bit. It's a nice frame design. It is surprisingly rigid. It's using a quasi-isotropic carbon. Even though it's super skinny, it's really strong. I have, however, broken the frame, so it's not indestructible. It's about as durable as any other Toothpick frame out there. This particular project was a collaboration between me and Diatone, and it's not really a full collaboration, and I'll talk about these companies I'm working with a little bit later again as well, but it's more like I was just doing some heavy consulting for them on this quad to make it really good and usable. There are some aspects of it that aren't going to be as usable as I would like it to be. I'm pretty sure it's still going to have a standoff in the way of the USB port, so that's going to be super annoying, but it's not the end of the world. You really don't change your settings all that much, and you can do a lot of your settings changes through the OSD now anyways, so it's not really a big deal. The rest of it has been improved tremendously. The original weight of this quad was like 90 grams, and so we went through many iterations of me yelling at them to get the weight lower and lower and lower to get to this point, and it is a really good performing quad. It's just a good all-around, well-built Toothpick, as well as I like the motors. Their motors are really great. Their Mamba motors really perform great. They're among the best performing 1103 motors that I've tried. So look for that. It's coming very, very soon. One last thing. I think it's the last thing. Yeah, I think it's the last thing here. Okay, so this is a goggle strap. And I picked this up because it's just a new style of goggle strap. It's apparently from UAV, which I'm not really a fan of, but whatever, it's a new goggle strap. This is fine. I wouldn't say that this is like the best strap in the world, but it's totally fine, totally suitable. It doesn't have as much stretch and give to it as some other more spandexy type of straps, and the battery bay is actually really tight because it's hard to fit like the 18650 case from the Fat Shark from Fat Shark in here nicely, and then if you try to use a smaller battery, it doesn't really fit and just kind of slips through. So this strap is if you need a new goggle strap, it's not any better or worse than any other strap. You make do with it what you will. I think that's all. Yeah, that's all for now, and got a lot of other stuff coming as well. I hope this was really helpful, and I'm just gonna skip the dental thing because I'm tired of talking and my throat is already hoarse. So floss your teeth. Take care. Bye bye.